Have you ruined your chances of becoming Prime Minister, Mr Johnson?
The man who wants to be the next Prime Minister. Boris Johnson's strategy so far has been to say little, but increasingly the question being asked of him, why were police called to his partner Carrie Symonds' home? On the front page of every major newspaper, reports of a domestic between Boris and his partner. Today, Boris centre stage in Birmingham, facing the Conservative Party members, but avoiding the crucial question.
That there is one subject on everybody's lips today, and they want to know why the police were called to your house in the early hours of Friday morning.
I don't think they want to hear about that kind of thing, unless I'm wrong.
While the crowd then appeared to cheer Boris on, he continued to evade the question. Not once, not twice, but 5 times.
You've just taken up a minute with that answer, which has told us absolutely nothing.
That's okay. Well, look, that's a fair point. And
with respect, you're completely avoiding my question.
Well, I told you I was going to tell.
Does a person's private life have any bearing on their ability to do the job as Prime Minister?
Promises.
It is a very simple question. I think any politician. I shall ask Jeremy Hunt the same question as well. Does a person's private life?
Don't boo! No. Don't boo the great man.
When he answers this question, I will move on.
No.
Does a person's private life have any bearing on their ability to discharge the office of Prime Minister?
Well, I've tried to give my answer pretty exhaustively.
And yet many feel he did not answer that question. While some Conservative Party members questioned our prospective Prime Minister's character, other MPs played it down today.
It's a really odd one, this, because, we all have arguments. If I had a newspaper living next door to my house, they would be picking up the odd ding-dong I have with Mrs Garnier.
The Guardian newspaper who broke the story claimed to have heard a recording of Carrie Symonds and Boris Johnson having a screaming row. The newspapers say Carrie can be heard shouting at Boris to get off me and asking him to get out of my flat. I've just spoken to one of the next-door neighbours who said she'd rather not appear on camera, but told me in the early hours of Friday morning she could hear an argument going on. From inside the flat, she could hear a woman shouting. She said things were being smashed inside. She became worried about the woman's safety, and then the police arrived.
My missus heard stuff, and she gave me a call. She just said she heard lots of shouting and screaming, and some things being smashed or broken. And then there was police.
Not in with some of the neighbours, it would seem. This their own local campaign against the leadership candidate in this safe Labour seat. It follows a difficult week for the Conservative Party after now suspended MP Mark Field was filmed grabbing a protester by the neck.
Can you get this person out?
It's a peaceful protest.
While Boris's critics say he must be able to face uncomfortable scrutiny if he wants to be Prime Minister. Based on today's performance, it looks as though he'll do everything he can to avoid that.
Well, as you saw there, Boris Johnson wouldn't be drawn on his private life, but he did take questions on other issues at the first Conservative leadership hustings in Birmingham today, alongside his rival Jeremy Hunt. Mr Johnson claimed that when he made a promise in politics, I keep that promise and deliver. Mr Hunt described himself as the underdog, but declared he was the man to deliver Brexit and unite the Conservative Party. Kamian Zeram reports.
Mr Johnson, what have you got to say about the alleged altercation in South London the other night?
Whatever the headlines and gossip about his character...
Hello, Boris. Nice to see you. How are you?
It's Tory members, not the wider public, who'll decide whether Boris Johnson is fit to lead the nation.
Mr Johnson, does your character matter to this debate?
The unpredictable Johnson or the opposite in Jeremy Hunt. The first of many grassroots hustings, and believe it or not, there are some who haven't yet made up their minds.
Do you favour one over the other?
No. I think they've both got strong points, both got baggage.
I'm undecided, but I want to find out who's going to be a good listener and listen to the people of the country.
Mr Johnson's been accused of hiding from scrutiny, but today, no more. Though he flat refused to discuss anything he considered personal, only policy.
So just to be clear, you're not going to make any comment at all on what happened last night?
I think that's pretty obvious from the foregoing.
top of the agenda, Brexit.
And we must be able to come out on WTO terms so that for the first time in these negotiations we carry conviction. And it's precisely because we will be preparing between now and October the 31st for a no-deal Brexit that we will get the deal we need.
Promises soon followed for more spending on police and education, but also tax cuts. The hustings will tour the country to address regional concerns. Here in the West Midlands, he said he was frankly anxious about HS2 and could only offer a review. But perhaps the detail really is a bit dull, because leadership ultimately is about personality. And here and there, flashes of what makes Mr. Johnson so popular and so divisive.
I love hearing questions from you, but what about more from the audience? I mean, you know.
So personality versus policy. Jeremy Hunt, derided by some as Theresa May Mark II, also putting big tax cuts at the heart of his campaign.
And I'm going to take a giant step to making that happen by a radical cut in corporation tax to 12.5% Irish levels to turbocharge the British economy.
The calculation many members will be making, though, not just how well these two men are in control of their briefs, but who's the better street fighter. For who would ignore the risk of a general election, facing Nigel Farage on the right and Jeremy Corbyn on the left?
Faced with a hard left populist, we could choose our own populist. Or we could do better. We could choose our own Jeremy.
And surely what did for Mrs May might see Mr Hunt off too. Is he not still a Remainer at heart?
Labelling people as Remainer, Brexiteer. We're not going to unite our party, and we're not going to get this vote through the House of Commons. We've got to come together and deliver Brexit.
I'm joined live now by three party members who will choose the next leader and, of course, the next Prime Minister. We'll start with Angela Warner. Now, you were undecided. Where are you now? And given the talk of character, are there still two candidates in this, or has Boris ruled himself out?
Still undecided, still two candidates. I'm hearing what I want to hear about the economy, social justice, so there's a good level playing field there. However, I think this does come down to leadership, comes down to personality.
And style then.
It does, yeah. So the big two things I think that we need a good mix of passion, but you've got to balance that with authenticity. You've got Boris with his passion, can't fault it, authenticity through his informality, but you're looking at Jeremy and
let's talk about Mr Hunt in a minute, because Charlotte Hodivala, you're a member and a councillor and a Boris camp, firmly in the Boris camp, or at least you were. You're going to tell me that what allegedly happened the other night in London doesn't matter, but there are lots of people in the country who think it does. Why should they believe that Boris is the best person to lead the country?
I don't think character is a matter of whether you ever had an argument with your other half. I don't know any couples who've never had an argument. I think Boris made it very clear in there that's their personal life and that we should respect that. I do think he shows his character in many other ways, and I was particularly impressed with his grasp across many briefs, including county lines. But what I'm heartened at is to see how much our party is now uniting already behind two really strong candidates, and yes, I'm still backing Boris.
So you mentioned policy, and of course, in a sense, Mr Hunt, that's his strong suit. Takir Hussain, also a member. Your challenge, if we're talking character, your guy, well, he's a bit dull, isn't he?
Well, no, I couldn't agree with that. I mean, just before we came to this debate, Jeremy Hunt went to the heart of Sparkhill with us and went to one of my favourite curry houses, Imran's restaurant. He got into the local people, he learned about the culture, he sat down and he even cooked us a bounty and a naan. So I think it's more, for Jeremy, it's more getting that more publicised. He does it off the cuff, he does it with the normal people.
So he does have personality. Look, let's drill this down to the person, in a sense, that both of you have got to persuade, you in a sense more. Angela, does this come down, ultimately, in terms of policy, does it come down to Brexit?
No.
There's more to it.
It comes down to style and leadership style. Hunt is all about that comment that he made, that don't mistake British politeness for British weakness.
That you like that?
I like that.
He does have personality.
That does appeal.
To our three voting members, thank you for joining us. And back to you in the studio, Fatima.
Thanks very much, Kemi. Well, joining me now is Peter Kellner, the former president of the polling agency YouGov. Peter, thanks for coming in. First of all, Boris Johnson, on the front of every newspaper, has refused to answer questions. Is it going to make any difference whatsoever as to how the Tory membership sees him?
Not yet. In fact, look, going back of recent decades, private lives, they've excited the tabloids far more than they've worried the wider public. Cecil Parkinson in the 1980s, cabinet minister, had to resign because his mistress had a child. It became a scandal. The following election, his majority locally went up by 3,000. Early weeks of 1992, Paddy Ashdown all over the tabloids having had an affair. A few weeks later, general election. His majority went up, guess what? By 3,000. Boris's own private life hasn't held him back. However, and there is a however here, if over the tomorrow Sunday papers over the next few days, if the narrative shifts from simply about his private life to a wider character issue, is he unprincipled? Is he erratic? Is he a bit dodgy? If the allegations widen and take hold, that could cause him trouble.
So we could see more trouble tomorrow, potentially?
Depends what's in the Sunday papers.
It is interesting, though, because this is a Conservative party, the party seen as the traditional family values champion, and yet you still think it might not make a difference if it is purely about his personal life.
No, in my quite long lifetime, things have changed. Race, sexuality, things like this, they matter very little politically. They sometimes make big news stories. Hypocrisy matters. Dodgy financial dealings matter. Dishonesty matters. If politicians are caught out misbehaving in those areas, it's trouble. But honestly, private lives on their own don't matter very much.
Now, it's the Conservative membership who decides here, but can we talk about the wider electorate? If there's a possibility of a general election soon, do we think there's enough time for the Conservative Party and the Labour Party to recover what they have lost previously in the European election?
Heaven knows, if there's a general election this autumn, because Parliament gets stuck on Brexit and it's deadlocked, and there's an October or November election, the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage, will be out there saying, Brexit hasn't been delivered, vote for us. We've had a big surge with the Liberal Democrats. The Conservatives are in trouble, Labour's in trouble. So you've got a sort of unstable four-party competition in a first-past-the-post election system. And, Fatima, I wouldn't have a clue to within 100 seats what any party will get. I mean, it would be the most extraordinary general election campaign I can remember.
And what's your polling showing you about what the public generally think about both of these candidates?
Boris Johnson is a lot more popular than Jeremy Hunt. However, a lot of that is because Boris Johnson is much more known than Jeremy Hunt. It'll be very interesting over the next 2 or 3 weeks as Jeremy Hunt gets roughly equal airtime as Boris Johnson, as the public get to know him, whether that gap will start to narrow. But at the moment, Boris is ahead.